at this point, you have a document, and I've moved some things around from our last tutorial. You have a document with some objects in it, some types, some shapes, and you need to make adjustments to these shapes. So the idea with Adobe programs in general is that you're going to be making and editing as you go. And so you're not going to use the tool panels and create all these things and then edit them. You'll create, edit back and forth until this works for you. So I have some objects on this page, and I wanted to go through the menus, the panels over here, and how to use each one of them. So first is a layers panel, and so the document can have multiple layers, and you can lock them and unlock them and view or not view them. So this is really helpful if you have a lot of different objects, and it works like the objects on the layer that's at the top are the objects that are on the top of the page that you have. So like I said, you can lock them, unlock them, and let's see what that does. So I'm going to lock all the objects in layer 1, which is the one I had created, and you can change their name. So now that this layer is locked, and I have the selection tool, I can't select or move or edit any of these pieces because it's locked. So this is really helpful in just keeping your objects organized and in a way that you can edit them or see or unsee them. And so if you have some objects, like say I want to take these two and move them to another layer. This is art 2. So now this is on that second layer, and you can see that it changed the lines to the color, the layer color, which you can also. So now I won't be able to move this object, but I can move any other object that's on this art layer. And if I want to see what it looks like without that object, I can turn it off, turn it back on. So yeah, that's layers panel. You can add new ones here. You can delete them here. And then, so artboards are a way to organize. I think, so in the first tutorial, we kind of saw how we could have multiple artboards, different sizes. And so you have this big document space, and you can add artboards. If you just say new, it will just create a new artboard here. And if you select this by clicking once, you can manually change the size. You can change the title here. You can change where it's positioned in the document. And I wouldn't worry about this other stuff. So, and it would be helpful, like, if you do have multiple artboards, you can say, this is panel 2. When you're clicking on it, it's just centering that artboard in your page. So, and then I can move stuff to different artboards, and it'll remain on the same layer here, but maybe I want this one to move here. So if you're moving an object from one layer to another, you can see the little dot. You can do this with multiple objects too. So I have these two objects selected, and just by clicking this square and moving it, oh, I have it locked, so I can't do it. If you click this square and just move it up to another layer, you can move those objects to that layer. Libraries is a Creative Cloud thing. So I have all these colors in here from a project I was working on recently. And you'll see how these come into play more with Cooler, but let's leave that one for now. Links. So the links panel holds the information that tells Illustrator where to find and how to display the image that you have placed in your document. So to place an image, you go to File and Place, or you could do Shift Command P. And then I'm going to go to my documents for this class. And I'm going to go to Inspiration. Let's pull from Lisa Congdon. And so you find the image that you want to add into the document and say place. And then now I have it in sort of this queue with a tool attached to it. And I can either click once and it will just place the image at the size, the dimensions that the picture is. So it's 800 by 1076. So it just places that at its actual size, or you can Shift Command P, select the image, and then if you click and drag, it will create a proportional box for that image to go into. And then you can see it came up on my links panel here. Okay, so it looks like Illustrator now is automatically embedding the images. So normally you'd be able to edit the original from here, but because it's automatically embedded, you have to click the menu to select Unembed. And save it as a PSD. So now you have this linked image, and you can select Edit Original, and it will open, if you have your computer set up the way that I do, it will open the image in Photoshop. Right, so now that I selected Edit Original, it opens this image in Photoshop, and I can change this image. Let's say I wanted to invert the colors. Saving it, leaving the document. Now it says some files are missing or modified in the links panel. Would you like to update them now? Yes. So then the changes that I made in Photoshop will show up in Illustrator. This is really useful if you are going to change images when you have them. And it also sort of complicates things when you're delivering a file to a client, because like I said, you need to keep those images and the so the Illustrator knows where to find them, because it's not embedded. But once you have the image that you want, and actually I super hate this as inverted as it is, so I'm gonna change it back. And yes. Okay, so now, as I mentioned before, Illustrator was automatically embedding the image, and that creates links in the document, but now I want to embed it so that it's part of the Illustrator file. It's not just pointing to the image and displaying it, it's actually part of the file itself. So now I'm going to tell it to embed the image, say OK. Now you see this little shape and you know it's embedded. And now I don't have to worry about where this image is in my files. It's just automatically part of this Illustrator document. Okay, so the character panel is how we're going to edit type. So I have this practice title, and I want to change this to knockout. No, I want to change this to Swiss. And I want the mono version. I want it bold. Okay, so I changed the typeface using this, and you can change the style that's in the family here. So I can change it to thin. And then you can change size here by clicking up or down, making it bigger or smaller. And So this next option is for space between lines and also called leading. So I can increase the space between lines. If you hold shift, it will go in increments of 10 or more, or 10. And you can go down by 10. So that's leading. And size, and the same, you can hold shift and it will go in increments of 10. And then there's also options for space between letters, otherwise known as tracking. So I can increase this by, I'm holding shift to get increments of 10. I really want it to be space between letters. I can add a lot there. I don't need 2 lines, well, I'll keep it. So just to show you leading a little bit more, again, this is increasing the space between the lines of type that you have. And you know, you can take it too far and create some effects if you really want to. I can't read this, and I hate it, so I'm going to increase till I can read it. Okay, so now all this type is behind these objects and I can't see any of it. So I want to move it to the front, and I can do that by right-clicking and saying Arrange, Bring to Front. So you can do it, bring forward will just bring it in front of the next object that it's behind. So you can bring forward, bring to front, send backward, and send to back. So I'm going to bring it to the front all the way up. And I'm going to change the color so we can see it. Okay, and see now it's all the way, it's to the front of this layer, but it's still behind the second art layer, which is on top, unless I remove it. Cool. So now all this type is too big for this artboard, and I don't want it going off the edge. I want it to fit on the artboard. I can just change the size of the type this way. Or again, I can use my selection tool and shift to keep it proportional and make it the size that I need. And say I do want it in front, again, I can just select it and move it to the next layer. Now you can see it. Still a little illegible, gonna make it bold. Color, maybe not the best choice. Let's make it gray. Okay. So those are the type tools. And so I wanted to show you one thing with type, that if you want to put type in a shape that's not a square by, you know, creating it this way, you can create a shape first. So I have the circle created, and then I select the type tool. I select the area type tool and click on it. You have to click on the path itself, and then it will put type inside of there. So I'm going to copy this. So it's assuming a lot of traits that I created with the earlier type, and you kind of have to go back and customize that based on what you need. So now I have type filling a circle, and it's overrunning it. So I'll just decrease. So now all the type is fitting inside of this circle. It's not perfect. The shaping isn't perfect. There might be some returns or just the way that we have the type shaped. So you may need to play with spacing and with spacing until it fits well into there. So again, it's just making these tiny adjustments until it feels good for you and does what you need it to do, and you can read everything. So there's type in a circle. if you have type in a square, this will just be easier to see these tools with type in a square, so I'm going to show you that way. Okay. So I can edit all the same attributes here. Space, mono, and you can do this with the circle type as well. Let's get this out of here. So I'm going to make the same adjustments for both the circle and the square. This is indent, so you can see on the left-hand side, we're starting to move the type from the left in. And this is first line indent, so you can make the first line move in if you want a tab to indicate space between a paragraph or indicate a new paragraph. You can also, things are so custom that you can actually make the first line negative if you have an indent. So this will let me go down to -26. Oh, this one's letting me even go outside. And InDesign, it won't let you go outside of the type space, but here you can go all the way beyond it. It's pretty silly. Okay. So you have space from the right, space from the left, and then first line indent. This is space after or space before or space after. So you can see the little arrows indicating a block before a paragraph. So if I make this a new paragraph, let's do this so you can see. So right now I just have a return between the graphs. There's not enough indication that this is a new paragraph. You could just press enter again and that would give you space between. But a better way to do it is to customize that space between paragraphs. So you can increase it by a point. You can make it a huge space. You definitely want contrast between the space between lines and the space between paragraphs. And space after just, so that's adding space after this graph. Let's see, I might need to see 3. Okay, so now I've got 3 graphs, no space between. If I add space after, it's going to give me space between the paragraphs. It has very much the same effects. So 0 and 24. So here's how you can see the difference. Space after, space before. There's just different scenarios where one is better than the other. Okay, so that's paragraph. You can also hyphenate or unhyphenate here. Adding hyphens, removing hyphens. Since you're working on posters, I would definitely suggest not having them. There shouldn't be any reason to have a hyphen in a situation like this, because you don't have a ton of type. The time where hyphens really come in handy are when you have lots of type and very little space to put it in, but you have plenty of space and you shouldn't have a ton of type to work with. I'm just like beautifying my little practice page. Okay. So then let's move on to glyphs. So the glyphs panel just gives you, I'm going to yank this out for a second so we can see the whole thing. So the glyphs palette gives you every character that the typeface has. Let me make this smaller. Okay. So the glyphs palette just gives you every character that's available in the typeface you have selected. So because this is a trial font, I only have these characters. I don't have any numbers. I have some of these punctuation marks. But let's see one. Minion has, I think, the most expansive. So now this is in Minion Pro, and I have all these glyphs that you can see. There's some extra little shapes and markers that you can use where you need them. Some of them have special meanings. Obviously, there's currency, um, some ligatures, some math symbols as well are in here. So Minion's a really expansive glyph set, and it's part of why it's a great typeface, because this person thought of everything. They thought of all of these ligatures. These are ligatures. And they have, all of the different characters for different languages as well. So that's a glyph. Those are the glyphs panel, but then if you want to insert a glyph and you don't know how to type it, you can just click into a text box. So I have my cursor here at the end, and I want to add this arrow. So all I have to do is double click it, and it shows up inside of the text box here. So again, maybe I need this checkbox. Maybe I need this greater than or equal to sign. So things you wouldn't be able to type, you can go to the glyphs panel and find, and then insert them that way. Just need some more room here. All right. So next panel is swatches, where you can see all the colors. When you open an Illustrator document, you're going to have all these colors that come with it. I just select all of them and delete. I don't want any of these weird rainbow colors. So I have this one, which is a blue that I made. Okay. So I was customizing color, but I wasn't talking about how I was doing that. So I have this shape already made, and when you're looking at the colors, this is the stroke where it says stroke or X, and fill is the other. So, and you can select between those two things that you're working on by just pressing X. And I'll show you that more in action in a moment. So if I want to change this color, double click, and then you get the color picker. So you have options to just find the color yourself. You don't want this like deep forest green, brown. You can change it by changing the RGB values. Maybe I want this to be more green, so I'm gonna make it 80. And then you can see it kind of just moves it over here. And then you have option to change it with CMYK as well. So I want more black. I'm gonna make it 55. So it brings it back down to where it is in the color picker. And you can also do it by hex code here. So now I have this green. And if I want to change the fill, I can just select that box and then go pick the color. And both these objects have the same fill. So this technically has that fill, but because there's no space, it's just a line, so you can't see that fill, but it's there. And then if I want to add these colors to my swatches panel so that they stay permanently, all I have to do is click and drag, and then that color is there to select for another object, so you don't have to type in the color code again. you can just select that. So maybe I want to make this high, that green color now. So I have the stroke selected, and I'm clicking that color that I just added, and now it is there. Now maybe I want to keep this color in my back pocket, so I pull the blue down. I'll just show you what happens. You can see it has created a fill between this point and this point, and then in here too, you can kind of see it created this green fill. So that's not what I want though. I want to make the high to be green. The next panel is the gradient panel, and it's always set to this default gray. To play with it, let's first make a rectangle. And right now it has some default fills from our other artwork. And you can click the gradient to activate. That did that on the stroke. So see how it added it to the stroke. I'm gonna switch to the fill and click the gradient again. I'm gonna remove it from the stroke for now, just to keep things simple. And so then you have this gradient slider where essentially you can click on these slider bars and you can choose a color from your swatches palette here. So if you select the swatches, it will pull up your swatches palette. You can use the color palette here. And you can choose, right now it's on grayscale, so you can switch to CMYK and change the color this way, or select along this palette, or you can use the eyedropper to select a color off of your artwork. And so then you continue to do this until you're happy with the gradient you have. Gonna make this one orange. So right now I just have 2 colors, but you can add as many as you want. Like a sunrise effect now. So you can move along them. The sliders on the bottom are for color, and the sliders on the top help to move, they move the blend back and forth. So if I move the purple all the way to this color, then the transition will happen right here. So these just, these give you the transition place. So if I move this here, I have orange all the way up until about here, and then it starts to transition into yellow. So this is the middle of the transition between the 2 colors that, between these 2 colors. And there's other options. You can, this is a linear gradient. You can choose radial gradient, or this is a newer, which is freeform. So now you can see the points are in the corners here, and you can kind of move them around. And then you can just change the color here by double clicking on them. Kind of fun to play with. This changes the transition point. You can add more just by clicking. Okay, so that's gradient. And then let's move into here. We're moving into the stroke palette. This one's really simple. It's mostly for when you have a line drawn. Just gonna give it a quick color, and so I can change the weight of the stroke here. Let's zoom in. I can change the stroke. If I hold Shift and click up, it will go by 10 points. It will increase by increments of 10, or decrease by increments of 10. I'm going to cut this so I can show you what these other parts do. So this, you can choose the end cap for this stroke. So here I made it rounded by selecting this option. And this is like either the butt cap or the projecting cap, just slightly different. You can change the way corners are shaped. So this is a miter join, round join, and bevel join. Let's zoom in. So it's bevel, round, and miter. And then when you have full shapes that all the edges are joined, or all the points are joined together in one continuous shape, you can change where the stroke lands on the line. So here, the align stroke to center is aligning it to the center of your points. You can move it inside of your points, or you can move it outside of your points. Really subtle differences that you may never actually need. But you can also create dotted lines here, and these dictate how long the dashes are and how big the spaces are. So it's 80, 20 is a smaller gap. And you can do different ones. It doesn't have to be consistent. You can add another one here for 1 point. So it does, yeah. So you can see you can just kind of play with that to find the dash that you need. And then if you round it, you can make these like little pill-shaped ones too, if you round the end caps. The transparency palette deals with shapes and how they are, how opaque or transparent they are, and then also what blending mode they're in. So when you have objects stacked on top of each other, you can create different effects using these transparency and blending effects. So right now I have this gradient shape that we made and a dark rectangle behind it. So just to show you how transparency works, clearly at 100% opacity, we're not going to see that block that's behind this. But if we change to 50%, you have to click on the object and then go to 50%. Now you can see, or whatever, 44% here. Now you can see the object behind this one. And so you can imagine creating layers and layers of transparent objects, start to create some cool dimension. And so I'm going to leave this here, and then I want to show you some of the blending effects. So this is, I'm going to change this back to 100 as well. So both of these shapes are at 100% opacity. This one at 96, change to 100. And if we change the blending mode, it will change how the colors appear over one another. And we use multiply a lot. Let's change. So multiply kind of, you saw the white mostly disappear. And then you can see some remnants of the shape behind it, and the oranges are combining together. You know, this black is basically the same, but maybe this pink over this blue start to make a purple color. And same in this corner. It's pink. This one is blue in this corner, and then pink here. So it starts to make a purple. You can see how it's kind of combining the colors that are overlaid here. I would try each of them and kind of look for the effect that you want if you're interested. Appearance shows you all the effects that each object you have is working with, and this is also where you can add things like drop shadows. So let's remove the fill from this. If you check effects and stylize drop shadow, this is just really common for people to use when you need to show some like depth or something on top of another. And Here you can see how they're using some, they call it mode, but it's an effect of how the shadow appears. And if you select normal and bring the opacity all the way up, just type 100, you can see that it's black and faded as well. So once I've added that effect to this object, I'm clicking back on the object and I can see here the drop shadow that is connected to that object. And if I just click on it, now I can make more adjustments. Okay, I don't want it to have a blur. So now it just looks like a really stark shadow, so like high contrast. This light is, very close to this object, causing the shadow to be very defined. And you can change how offset it is. Okay, that's great. So there are other things in here, and if you want to explore those, feel free. And that's that. So then these last three panels are for manipulating more shape manipulation mostly, but so transform is really like a manual way of doing what you can do with the selection tool. So I'm just changing the scale of this. You can see in here it's changing the X and Y are the location of the image, and then width and height. So as I increase the size, the width increases and the height increases. If you chain these things together, then it will always scale proportionally. And you can rotate it here. This is all just like manual if you want to do it specifically with numbers. And align, so if you have several objects, so let's say I want to make all the objects on this page line up on that left-hand side. So I select all of them and then select this horizontal line left. And right now it's set to align to the artboard. So it's aligning everything with the left side of that artboard. But if I undo that and I select all these objects and say align to selection, it's going to align everything that I have selected with the furthest leftmost object. So you can see that here. And then these will align centers, align right side, align the tops, align the middles, align the bottoms. You can distribute objects, so I have these all aligned on the left side, but now maybe I want them distributed, a vertical distribution along the top. So this is creating equal space between the tops of each of these objects. If I want the same amount of space between each object, I can do vertical distribute space. It's hard to see that way. Let's do something a little more simple. So I have these blocks, and I have them all awry. So I'm selecting all of them, aligning in the center, and then distributing the space evenly between each object. So you can see that's like much easier than trying to do this manually, lining it up with the rulers here. Okay, and this is sort of a perfect segue into Pathfinder. So Pathfinder helps you to combine objects. So if you make your whole thing out of just shapes this way, you can combine these objects together into one. And the way to do that is to create these different objects and lay them over one another. So now these are all separate objects at the moment, and if I select a new shape mode to unite them, this will make them one singular shape. And you can see how these all work. Yeah, no result. I mean, this unite and exclude are the most common ones that I use. So exclude is helpful for creating objects inside of objects, like a donut or so these objects are both filled, and if I select exclude, then that center object came out of that the outer object here. So if you play with these, you can get some different shape effects, and yeah. And you still have ability to edit them separately. So I can edit the outside here, change that shape, and it doesn't affect what's in there, just using the direct selection tool. And I can select the object inside too, and it just readjusts however you need. You can see that's sort of a frame. That center area is hollow completely. So yeah, I'll add the gradient back in. Fun. Cool. All right, that concludes the panels. Good luck.